So let's talk about why our fantasies are important. It's Holy Week. That means we just came through Palm Sunday, and so of course, I talked about the imagery and the symbolism, the politics of that moment. The crowds wave palm branches, symbols of national sovereignty, this call to Jesus to go to war for them. But Jesus rides on a donkey, this image of peace. I will not go to war, I will bring peace to you. And of course, whenever I talk about the peace of Jesus and the nonviolence of Jesus and choosing that path, people inevitably want to ask me hypothetical situations. So I tweeted this week, it gained some traction, this is what I said. I said every time I talk about nonviolence, people want to jump in to ask me what I would do if I had to defend myself or my family. Look, I get that it's fun to imagine ourselves as the hero of these situations, but life is not lived in the hypothetical. Nonviolence is about making the most peaceful choice we can possibly imagine in any given moment. Commit yourself to that, and you will eventually find yourself on the way. See, here's the problem. We can always find an absurd hypothetical situation where we may be forced into a choice that we would not want to make. But the more that we do that, the more disconnected from the path of Jesus we become. Here's a great example of how absurd these hypotheticals can become. Somebody sent me this article from Joan Baez. Okay, so you're a pacifist. Let's say you're in the room and your grandma is being attacked by a man with a gun. What do? Do you shoot him? Well, no, I'm a pacifist. I don't have a gun. Okay, let's say you do have a gun. Do you shoot him? Am I a good shot? Yes, you're a very good shot. Okay, then I shoot him in the hand. No, you can't shoot him in... Okay, you're not a good shot. What do? Do you shoot him? Well, I definitely don't shoot if I'm not a good shot because I don't want to hit grandma. No, you have to do something. You have to shoot him. You have to kill him. Don't you see this is important? See, we can always construct these bizarre hypotheticals and layer on more and more ideas until eventually we're forced to make the choice that someone wants us to make. But what happens is when we allow those fantasies to disciple us, they become eventually our sense of identity in the world. And that's a real problem. Because when we imagine ourselves at the core of our identity as the person with a gun who will step in a crisis to stop the bad guy and save the day, eventually that's going to filter its way down into everything that you do. People that you encounter are immediately going to be put into the camps of good guys and bad guys, enemies and friends, people like me or people not like me. And you're not going to pull out your gun and shoot them in those scenarios, but you are going to treat them differently. You're going to choose the path of exclusion or violence or even excommunication from your circle of influence over listening to them, disarming the situation, de-escalating the situation, looking for the ways that you can even learn from someone you disagree with. It disciples us in a way of thinking about who we are in the world. We are set against everyone that we encounter, misjudging people constantly for the threats that they may, or probably, let's be honest, most likely, do not pose to us. This is the reality of it, that when we allow ourselves to be discipled by John Wick, we are going to live in a particular way. And look, I saw that movie. It was a lot of fun. A movie about a guy whose dog is killed and he goes out and gets the bad guys. But that's not the narrative that I want to shape me at the deepest, most important parts of my life. Are there scenarios in this world where people are forced into terrible choices to defend themselves or the people that they love? Of course there are. Is it possible that I might be in one of those situations in my life? It's possible. But I'm not going to allow that bizarre outlier situation to be the one that shapes the way I think about my neighbors, about the strangers that I encounter, about all the people around me, because that's not the way of Jesus. Jesus does not disciple his disciples to arm themselves against an unfriendly world. And yes, of course, people will point to the passage in Luke where Jesus says, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and go and get one. But if we read that in context, this is clearly not about self-defense. In fact, he says as much. He says, do this so that the prophecy will be fulfilled. And he calls back to an image from Isaiah that he will be numbered with the transgressors or the rebels. His disciples come back with 2 swords, and he says, no, look, that's enough. You don't need more than that. This isn't a war we are waging. This is a rhetorical image we are constructing, so that when I am arrested, people will assume that I am like them. I am looking for a fight. I am looking for war. And yet, even when his disciples fall into that trap, because they've been discipled by John Wick just the same as all of us, and the sword is unsheathed and one of the attackers is injured, Jesus says, stop, put it away. He heals the one who is arresting him. He scolds his disciples and he says, no, the point here is that peace has often been criminalized. Even my attempt at peace, my refusal of self-defense, my refusal to allow you to defend me will still lead to my criminalization. Peace is often criminalized. Think of Moses before Pharaoh saying, let my people go. What you are doing, the violence of slavery is wrong. Look at John Lewis and the argument to get into good trouble at times. Think of all those throughout history, conscientious objectors who have refused their part in war. To lay down the sword, to refuse violence, to pick up the path of peace, this is often actually criminal, and Jesus says, I want that to be seen. I need them to know that my peace will be seen as a transgressor and a rebel, and in that, maybe I can open their eyes to something different. Maybe even more importantly, maybe I can open your eyes, my friends, my disciples, to a new way forward. Peter, who drew the sword to attack the arrestor, eventually he, Christian tradition tells us, was martyred himself. He understood finally in that moment the path of peace that leads us to make the most peaceful choice possible in any given situation. Now, is the most peaceful option possible always the one that we would hope for? No. And there are terrible situations in this world. But I refuse to allow those terrible outlier moments to be the ones that will disciple me about who I am, the path that I should walk in the world. I pray that I am never confronted with a moment where my wife or my kids are attacked and I have to defend them, but I would hope that even in that moment, I would be ready to give my life for those that I love, because that's the example that Jesus set for me. I don't follow John Wick, even though I enjoyed the movie. I follow the one who showed us the path to peace. And that means that constantly I want my fantasies, I want my imagination to be discipled by that one, the Prince of Peace, who shows me that there is, more often than we think, a path that will present itself that will lead to the de-escalation and the disarming of all of our fantasies about who we are, and lead us back to the way that will heal the world. This is what it means to choose the path of nonviolence. It means to disciple yourself on the path of peace, believing that if that can capture our imagination, it will again slowly sink down into every interaction that we have, every argument that we enter, every person that we encounter, and we will look for the way to bring healing and peace and grace into those encounters. And yes, the world is broken, and there are moments when our convictions will be tested and maybe even pushed past the boundaries. But I trust that if we allow ourselves to be shaped by Jesus, even in those moments where we choose the worst, God will look on us with compassion, inviting us always back to the path of Jesus.